Hello, my name is Laura Gordon. I'm serving as an AmeriCorps Vista with Good Shepherd Food Bank of Maine. Today I will be reviewing the Nonprofit Strategy Revolution, Real-Time Strategic Planning in a Rapid Response World by David LaPiana. So LaPiana is a veteran in the nonprofit world, and he served as the CEO of a nonprofit organization and now has his own consulting firm for nonprofit organizations. He spent the last 4 years with his firm researching the concept of the nonprofit strategy revolution, comparing it to the traditional model of strategic planning. So before we get started, let me explain the makeup of the book. The first half of the book explains the revolution, and the second half is a collection of resources so that you can create a strategy in one day. So the first chapter and the first part is what is a strategy revolution? And this chapter explains the difference between traditional strategic planning and the strategy revolution. Chapter 2 is the strategy pyramid, where LaPiana shows the difference between organizational, programmatic, and operational strategies. So those are the three types of strategies that he identifies, and he puts them on a pyramid to show how each one is important to each other. Chapter 3 is understanding organizational strategy. He both defines it and explains it, and shows how we're going to use the cycle that we'll mention later to create a strategy. Organizational strategy and strategy formation is chapter 4, and this chapter defines the three concepts of understanding identity for organizational strategy. And these include business model, market awareness, and competitive advantage. Chapter 5 is developing a strategy screen, and LaPiana gives tools to decide on a strategy, which is called the strategy screen, and when to take an opportunity, where he gives us the opportunity matrix. Chapter 6 is big questions, strategy formation, and implementation. In this chapter, he addresses how to define and approach the big question. So this is the problem that we're going to solve in our strategic plan. Chapter 7 is forming programmatic strategies. And this chapter explains programmatic strategies and how to build this type of strategy to advance an organization's mission. Chapter 8, forming operational strategies, explores what an operational strategy is and when to form a new operational strategy. And lastly, chapter 9, putting it all together. This is where he gives a summary of the book and empowers you to go out and use this new plan. So let's talk about the strategy revolution. LaPiana says, the nonprofit strategy revolution is all about quickly converting thought into action in real time in order to address opportunities and challenge in a rapid response world. And he gives this definition on page 110. So although this definition is given at the end of the book, he's kind of leading up to this idea. And at the beginning, he defines strategy as an organized pattern of behavior towards an end. While this is a general definition for a strategy for any type of organization, he talks about it more in the nonprofit setting when he says, strategies must be reconsidered as often as key circumstances change, or the nonprofit risks losing touch with its community and market. And that can be found on page 6. And he talks about this because even though a nonprofit it's not marketing anything per se, but we're constantly competing for resources. And we need to understand who our community is and who we're trying to reach, which is why we need to always be considering what strategies we're using. And then he goes on to say on page 8, when you focus on goal setting rather than strategy formation, you get goals that, while valuable in themselves, may not add up to anything bigger. And so as we talk about traditional strategic planning, that's a very important point that LaPiana makes, because in traditional strategic planning, we're setting long-term goals that we're going to tackle over a period of, let's say, 3 years. And he says that it's impossible to see what a rapid changing world will be like 3 years from now, which is kind of the course of most traditional strategic planning models. They're usually drawn out for at least 3 years, sometimes as many as 10 years. So when we're not considering our rapid changing world, this plan can quickly become outdated. Secondly, many of the goals in traditional strategic planning are never even met. So we may make all these goals, probably meet 10% of them. Thirdly, strategic formation requires looking at the present and the history of the organization. So we can't really make any assumptions based on the future. We need to really look at where we're at and where we've come from. What do we need to address right now? And lastly, the reality of strategy is an ongoing process of thinking and acting. So we need to constantly be looking at what's happening now. Let's make a plan, let's act on it. But how is this action that we're having affecting the rest of our organization? So it's a constant exchange between thinking and acting. So let's next talk about the strategy pyramid. So LaPiana identifies the 3 different types of strategy built on a pyramid. First is organizational strategy. He defines it as the means a nonprofit uses to determine how it will advance its mission, realize its vision, and deliver real value to the community or cause it serves through successful navigating competitive, collaborative, and other market dynamics. So we're looking at who we are, what are we hoping to accomplish, and what are the other resources that we're competing for? How can we work with other organizations to really make a meaningful difference in our communities? And then below that, we have programmatic strategy. This helps to define what an organization is in the world. Its direct focus is on finding the best way to carry out the mission. He defines that on page 89. So we're looking at what are the services that we offer to accomplish our mission and make that impact. And then the final type of strategy is operational strategy. That's going to be our base. He defines it as supporting organizational and programmatic strategies by providing that stable, well-functioning organizational foundation. That definition can be found on page 99. So while each of those strategies are built on each other, we need to take a top-down approach. So we start with the organizational strategy, then we can work down to the programmatic strategy, then all the way down to operational. So how are we going to create that change once we know what type of strategy we're focusing on? He proposes the real-time strategic planning cycle. So let's break that down a little bit more. First of all, there's 7 components. And first we start with what's our business model? We need to know who we are, what we do, and how we're going to get our funding. So once we have these 3 components, when we really understand what we're out to accomplish, we can look at market awareness. So we're going to understand who's our market, who are we trying to reach, and who are our competitors. So these competitors are people who are competing for the same resources that we're trying to get. We need to be aware that we're all competing for the same resources and really try to make us stand out. And that comes down to competitive advantage. What are we doing to make ourselves stand out from the rest of the competition? Do we do one thing really well? Or do we offer things that reduce cost? There's many different things that we can do to make ourselves stand out from other organizations. Maybe we're going to collaborate with other organizations. Once we understand who we are, we can move and where we're going, we can move on to the strategy screen. So this is criteria that we're going to come up with to determine if the strategy will be a good fit for our organization. And so all of these steps are done before we even come to what we're going to call the big question. So the big question is opportunities and or threats to which the organization will respond. So if we have a problem, we're going to come up with different ways to describe this problem. And our strategy is going to be influenced by this big question that we come up with. So we can weigh it against the strategy screen. And so that's when we develop and test potential strategies. We're using this strategy screen to figure out what strategy is going to be best for our organization. Does it fit with our mission? Does it approach the big question in the way that we want it to? And then lastly, we end with implementation. And so this is implementing the strategy, monitoring the environment. Do we need to go back and look at anything? Do we want to continue with a strategy? But it's really not the end of the cycle. It's just the last component because this is a cycle, so it's constantly repeating. So we're constantly going back and looking at our business model. Does it fit with our strategy? How have we changed with the world that's changing around us? And so that's one of the huge benefits of the strategy revolution that La Piana came up with. So now let's look at the two models in comparison with each other. Both do show careful planning and consideration for the future. So they're both looking at how can we meet the needs of our community and what do we need to do to better serve them. However, the traditional strategy is very time consuming and often the goals are not achieved. It's very forward thinking, so we're not looking at how we're adapting to our changing world. In contrast, the revolution helps organizations to be prepared for sudden changes within the plan. In other words, it's easily adaptable. So we're able to make the changes, and sometimes those goals do become outdated. So we're able to go back into our resources, our planning, and come up with a solution that's going to meet the changing needs of our community. But also importantly is this book has a lot of helpful tools and samples in the back. So La Piana gives us the tools that we need to be successful with the planning. And lastly, La Piana shares that the revolution can be written in the form of a traditional strategic plan. So if your board members or other stakeholders prefer the traditional strategic plan model, you can still use everything that you used in the strategy revolution and just write it in that old traditional form. So very useful. There are a few limitations that I came up with. If your board wants more long-term planning and goals, you can adapt the revolution, but it's not really designed for the long-term goals, but more short-term adaptation. Secondly, it also lacks the ability to show accountability through goal setting. So because it's so adaptable and you're constantly looking at change, sometimes you might have a harder time seeing how we're going to hold ourselves accountable to meet the needs of our community if we're not setting goals. So just be on top of that and set some goals and hold yourself accountable to produce results. Overall, I thought that this was a very helpful and useful book, and it's really changed the way that I see strategic planning. I appreciate how he broke it down into really achievable steps and understanding the importance of looking back at our plan and creating a plan that's easily adaptable. I rate this book 9 out of 10. I think it's very useful for everyone, even just to see different ways that we can approach strategic planning. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your time in watching this, and yeah, hope you enjoyed it.